All right, let's kick this off. We have miles to travel. Welcome to the NEH Funding Opportunities Information Session. Rolls right off the tongue. I'm Will Fenton, Program Officer in the Office of Challenge Programs here at the NEH. It has been my privilege to oversee the ARP Humanities Grant Making Program, which itself funded the fellowship programs that supported all of you over at Sundance and Firelight Media and ITVS. Now, before we dive into this session, and we have a lot to cover, I want to offer just a little bit of context about the NEH, the Humanities Grant Making Program, and of course, the format of this webinar. So for those of you who are new to the NEH, it's an acronym for the National Endowment for the Humanities, an independent federal agency that was created in 1965. The endowment awards grants to all sorts of organizations, museums, archives, libraries, colleges and universities, public television and radio stations, and importantly, to individual scholars like yourselves. The Division of Public Programs, which you'll learn a little bit more about today, has a long history of supporting public humanities programming that really reaches a broad, diverse public audience and I mean, makes a wide use of a range of different formats from film to television, radio productions, and other media. So on March 11th in 2021, President Biden signed something called the American Rescue Plan into law, and the ARP, or American Rescue Plan, invested new resources in the NEH to support the pandemic recovery. And for the endowment, this included substantial investments in state humanities councils, organizational grants, and of course, support for humanities grant making programs that really assist organizations and individuals that had been adversely affected by the coronavirus pandemic. In total, the NEH awarded $28.8 million to 13 grant making programs, so 13 external programs. That would be 6 grant making programs tailored to individual scholars and 7 for organizations. And today, these awards are currently supporting some 500 organizations and 150 individuals across the country. Is everybody still able to hear me? I'm seeing a quick note in chat that someone's having difficulty hearing me. If I don't hear from my fellow presenters, I will charge ahead here.
Well, just a quick note from me. I can hear you just fine. If other attendees are able to chime in on the chat feature to make sure that audio is working for them. Okay, I'm seeing some
All right,
can hear you.
lovely.
So I will work with David to help get his audio connected.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you all. The magic of webinars. All right, so just to recap again, the NEH awarded $28.8 million to 13 grant-making programs. Again, that was 16 on the individual side and 7 for organizations. And in total, this is supporting a wide range of organizations, 500 organizations and 150 individuals all across the country. Now, if we zoom in on the program for individuals, those 6 programs have had a really outsized impact on documentary film and media makers. So in fact, something like half of our recipients, 76 fellows, were funded through Sundance Institute, ITVS, and Firelight Media. And more than 2/3 of recipients identify as either historians or filmmakers. Now, there was one data point in particular that caught our attention here at the NEH, that more than 70% of you reported that you hadn't previously applied for support from the NEH. This, I think, presents an opportunity for us to introduce you to our relevant funding opportunities, and that would be especially the media projects in the Division of Public Programs. Now, of course, success in the ITVS, Sundance Institute, and Firelight Media programs does not guarantee success at the NEH. Some projects will be more or less suitable for our funding opportunities. But the point of this session is really to introduce you to our funding opportunities so that you have the information you need should you wish to apply. So over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to hear from a program officer, a former panelist, and a successful applicant. And I will introduce each of these speakers in turn, and they'll take 10 to 15 minutes, and they'll share their insights. And we've really set aside a good chunk of time, about 20 minutes, for Q&A at the end of the session. Now, when it comes to that Q&A, I ask that you please submit your questions using the chat thread. Some of you have already used it, so just look for the little dialogue button. You can click there. And we encourage you to focus on practical programmatic questions. We want to make the best possible use of our speakers' time and our speakers' expertise. Now, I encourage you to write your questions as soon as you think of them, even during the presentations, because during the Q&A, I'm going to work through the questions sequentially. So that rewards all of our early birds. I want to stress that even if we don't get to your question, however, this is a webinar that we really see as a beginning, not a culmination of our consultation process. And you'll see that our program officer from the Division of Public Programs will share his email address should you wish to follow up with specific queries. And finally, for those of you who weren't able to attend today's webinar, we're making this available through a recording, which will be available within the next week. And special thanks are due to Jess Ungar and Zach Robertson, who have worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make this webinar possible. So now to our main event. First up, I would like to welcome Mark Ruppel, who will demystify the NEH application process. Mark is a senior program officer at the NEH Division of Public Programs, where he specializes in film and digital media. He holds a PhD in digital studies from the University of Maryland, College Park. Before joining the endowment, Mark worked on several transmedia digital experimental learning and gaming projects, and he's written and presented widely on digital media and narrative design. I'll pass it over to you, Mark, whenever you want to pop on.
Thanks so much, Will, for that introduction and for really giving a great background on this program, which I think to many of us at NEH is both quite an intervention at a time that we really, really hoped we could do something for the field, but also in some sense a way forward too, given that so many of you are new to the NEH and have not had the kind of experience here that we would hope that folks exactly like you would come to get at some point in the future. So yeah, the name of this session is Demystifying Media Projects Grants, but really what we're hoping to do here and what I'm hoping specifically to do with you is to give you an entry point into what is in many ways both a daunting process potentially and also one that is filled with its own little bureaucratic mazes and labyrinths in the midst of it. The one thing that we'll mention that I really do want to stress from the outset is that we are here to help you with this process, with your project, with anything along the lines. You're going to notice at different points along the way, I give both my personal email as well as the email for our larger division inbox, and we really do encourage you to use it. Reach out to us, let us know if you have questions about the application project, questions about the project that you're working on itself, questions about where you should apply, how you should apply, when you should apply, and as I'll offer at the end here, whether you'd like to work with us on a draft of the application that you might be submitting or not. It's the best part of our jobs. It's a service that we provide to taxpayers. You pay us to do it. Please take advantage of it with us. So before anything else, though, too, I do want to congratulate every single one of you for receiving receiving NEH grants from the American Rescue Grant Program. Again, I cannot say how excited we are that we could support filmmakers during this difficult time. And I'm really hesitant to use a term like silver lining for anything like we've endured over the past couple of years. But we are hopeful that this support has done some good in both your own work as well as the broader work of the documentary field. And we're also hopeful that a lot of great projects and filmmakers come out of this. As I said before, we hope to reach you specifically through a program like this, but we also hope that we can make our doors a little bit more, we can let some light in on what oftentimes is seen as a rather closed door process. So I am going to try to demystify this process and help you feel more comfortable applying for a media projects grant in the Division of Public Programs. So first, though, a bit of background about the endowment. The humanities are, broadly speaking, the study and interpretation of human society, history, culture. Now, this includes subjects like language, literature, history, jurisprudence, philosophy, archaeology, comparative religion, ethics, art history, and the environments that they were created within. These are subjects that pay particular attention and reflect our diverse heritage, traditions, and history, And we hope to really provide the relevance of these subjects and to give access to the American public to all of the wonderful work that's being done here. The NEH is comprised of 6 divisions that explore the numerous dimensions of the humanities. The Division of Public Programs, my home division, the Division of Preservation and Access, the Office of Digital Humanities, the Division of Education Programs, the Division of Research, and the Office of Challenge Grants. If you'd like additional information about any of the programs or offices or divisions themselves, again, feel free to reach out and we can hopefully push you in the right direction. Now, through these offices and divisions, we fund a range of humanities projects, ranging from research, fellowships, education support, books, archives, digital projects, and of course, film, radio, and podcasts. In the Division of Public Programs specifically, we fund projects related to museums, historic sites, libraries, and other cultural institutions. We have a grant line called Digital Projects for the Public, which specifically does focus on public-facing digital humanities projects such as games, websites, VR, mobile experiences, and curated archival experiences that we hope in some sense would have the same kind of reach that our films, radios, and exhibit grants that we hand out wind up having. If you have questions about any of this, again, reach out. We have an awful lot of ways that we can show you what both the impact of these programs are, but also some inroads to them if you have some ideas for your own. We have a relatively new chair at the NEH, Chair Shelley Lowe, who was recently appointed by President Biden and confirmed by the Senate. She is a citizen of the Navajo Nation and grew up on the Navajo Reservation in Ganado, Arizona, and we are quite happy to have her with us. Okay, on to the important stuff for this meeting, our Media Projects grant line. Media Projects, as most of you know, funds film, television, radio, and podcast projects. For film, this means both long-form feature-length projects as well as short documentaries, which can be standalone films of up to 30 minutes or series meant for web or television distribution. Funding for short docs used to be in a separate program. Now it's in the Media Projects grant line. So if some of you have had contact with it in the past, make sure that you recognize that it is within Media Projects now and that you would apply through this program. Now, regardless of the format you're working with, we offer 2 levels of funding in Media Projects. Development, which is up to $70,000 and supports research, scholarly consultation, pre-production activities, and partnership building. We've also had projects cut a trailer during this time period, but the bulk of the work needs to be directed towards research and scripting. Production awards, up to $700,000, do exactly what you'd expect. They allow for archival research and rights clearances, meetings with scholars, additional script development, the actual production work itself, including filming, recording, and editing, and distribution, and the development of related resources such as websites and educational materials, and outreach and public engagement activities. An important point that often goes missed when we discuss these programs is that you do not need to come in for development first before production, but you will need to have undertaken activities that prepare you for this level. And some of these activities are fairly perfunctory for those who have worked in film for a bit, but are nonetheless absolutely necessary in order to apply for production. So this would include conducting extensive research on your subject, including archival work and preliminary interviews, identifying humanities themes, involving scholars in creating and interpreting the project's content, drafting the script or detailed treatments, which is a required component of a submission for a production grant, and again, designing your plans for distribution, outreach, and partnerships. Now, because of these requirements, almost across the board, we recommend that under-resourced or newer projects consider coming in for a development grant first. We encourage you to reach out to us again to ask about these levels. But in the general sense, if you haven't gotten to the stage of scripting, if you haven't had an opportunity to speak with experts or do archival research or conduct any sort of pre-production work that might allow you to jump right in, so to speak, to be shovel ready for production, I'd suggest development as a first entry point to the endowment. But again, we're here to answer questions about what might be relevant for you. So moving on to the application itself, the core section of a media project's proposal is the narrative, which is a maximum of 15 pages long. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but we break it down into a series of sections that you would probably address in most media proposals from other foundations anyways. So you need, for example, a program synopsis, outlines of the creative approach that you'll take, outreach and distribution plans, and project costs and fundraising activities. The advice that I tend to give is that if you treat the application as a series of 1 to 2 page questions, although some sections may wind up a bit longer, and you use these as an opportunity to really build out a cohesive, full sense of the project rather than checking boxes for just certain components. Now, there are, however, 2 elements in an NEH proposal that are unique to us as a funder, and in many ways, they're the most important. The humanities content and humanities themes section and the need to have a dedicated group of humanities advisors working at all stages of the project is absolutely central to a successful NEH proposal. For the humanities content section, we expect that you not only know your subject, but that you can demonstrate the interpretive perspectives that will guide the project moving forward. Let me unpack that for a bit. Scholars provide expertise. They help to translate and synthesize the scholarship around your project and provide an interpretive lens through which the themes can be surfaced and integrated into the film. There's a difference between presenting a topic and developing a theme, though, and the humanities advisory team is often the key to this distinction. So at a high level, for example, a project might address, say, the development of the railroad in the US, and that's fine, that's a good topic. But an interpretive theme or an interpretive perspective on this topic might focus on how, for example, this development shifted our understanding of time and space and geography and the country in the late 1800s. This is why we like to see different scholarly perspectives, as they provide questions to ask of your subject and context to place them within. So in the railroad example I just mentioned, the humanities team might include historians, but also perhaps a scholar of American studies to unpack the cultural impact of the railroad, or a literature scholar to explore the ways that writers dealt with this time period. So again, this section is key, and involving the humanities team at different points in the process, from the development to the script to reviewing of rough cuts, is an essential part of a success here at the endowment. So we're clear in what we call the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, about what we are evaluating. And we hope that this transparency actually becomes a benefit to you as you're constructing your proposal. If you notice on the slide here, humanities content and scholarship is not only important, but it's listed as number 1. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we give that an extraordinary amount of weight that we don't give other sections, but it is very much central to your success at the endowment. This is why we require a treatment or a script to judge whether the project seems to have a strong interpretive humanities perspective as well as a strong narrative. A short treatment is required for development, while a longer treatment or script is required for production. We also require a work sample, but in a way that may not necessarily be what you expect for a project of this sort. We require a previously completed work that demonstrates the experience and qualifications of the media team, especially the director or producer, to develop and produce the project successfully. Some folks do wind up including a work in progress reel or a trailer, but that is not required at this stage. Again, we want you to demonstrate expertise. Not every project, even getting to the production stage, has had the opportunity to do enough with their project to shoot a work in progress reel or something similar. So we also don't want that to be held against you along the way. But that completed portion, of course, that completed sample is a requirement, and without it, you would be deemed ineligible. Having a track record of distribution, of course, is also a good sign, as is the possibility of good reach and impact. And if you have questions about what that means, please let us know, because obviously a film that does the festival circuit is different than a film that's aired on PBS, is different than a web series that may find its home on YouTube. And we're comfortable with all of those, but it's about maximizing the strengths of the project, finding your audience, targeting them, making partnerships, building out educational content in order for the project to have its biggest impact. So again, what does a successful project look like? As it notes on the slide here, you need to have significant, appealing subjects, ones that not necessarily are new to a general public audience, but offer new perspectives to those subjects for that audience. You need strong scholarship and a humanities team, an accomplished media team who has some experience in finishing a project of this sort. You need engaging storytelling and a strong national or regional distribution plan. But again, as I said before, that varies from project to project. And then, of course, wide audience appeal. And as I said again, what this means does depend on where you're going with this, but as the Division of Public Programs, we really do hope to reach non-specialists with our projects. And you can't reach everyone with every film, but we hope that across our portfolio, we do reach a good swath of the American public. So make sure that whoever you're targeting with this, you have a good inroads to, you have a sense of what their needs are and where they are, and also a sense of how to customize content or to be able to create a story that's compelling for that audience and potentially others. But again, the key here is to follow what I showed on the previous slide. Go by the review criteria in the NOFO and apply these criteria to the relevant sections of your proposal. We ask our reviewers, which I'll get to in a minute, those same sorts of questions about the criteria as the ones you've seen. We attempt to make that a one-to-one match. Couple additional resources to consult when you're pulling together an NEH proposal. First and foremost, if you haven't already, search the web or the NEH website for NEH media projects. Just use those keywords. And once you get to the program landing page, you'll find the NOFO, a notice funding opportunity, archived webinars that are similar to this one, but a bit more expansive, samples of successful proposals, and that is a key point because we've given proposals that cut across both media format, so we have podcast, film, television series proposals there, but also funding levels, development and production. And while there's no one-size-fits-all approach to any of this, you can see over the course of some of the samples some different approaches that people have taken successfully to frame, say, the humanities content, the themes, the creative approach, the format, the way that they've done audience distribution, or perhaps even in some cases structured their scripts or treatments. And again, these are not meant to be templates of sorts, but they are meant to be models of different ways that you could approach these proposals and still be successful. There's also the funded grants query form. If you search the web for simply NEH grant query, you'll find a page that allows you to search through virtually the entirety of NEH grants to reference what's been funded under a particular subject or program. And we do encourage you to take advantage of this, not because NEH doesn't fund multiple projects on the same topic, we absolutely do, but just to get a sense of the trajectory of where things have gone at the endowment, to see what's taking place, say, in public programs, to see what's happening with a subject that you may be considering making a project about, and to really get a sense of what's been funded over the last few years and how you can build on that. As I said before, while it's not required, NEH does offer the opportunity to review draft proposals and give feedback on the project. The entirety of the NEH process is in some ways taxpayer-funded peer review and feedback, and our jobs really is to be the front end of that. So if you're curious about your fit for a specific program level, have questions about your project's approach to the humanities or the topic that you've chosen, or any other aspects of the proposal, please get in touch with us. We don't do line-by-line edits, of course, we're not that type of agency, but we are happy to dive into the proposals, sometimes really deeply, alongside the project team and give some back and forth ideas as to how to hone this, how to make this project put its best foot forward, and to ensure that what you submit is, as much as possible, the most representative application that you could potentially pull together for the NEH. It is our job, in other words, to get your proposals to the point where they are fundable, we hope, by the time you submit. The preliminary draft review, again, is completely optional. It is not part of any formal selection and award process. It will have no bearing whatsoever on your chances for success, i.e., whether you participated or not, does not influence our decisions down the line. But previous applicants have really found this feedback quite helpful in strengthening their proposal. And if it's a resubmission, for example, unpacking what took place, having some direction to move forward, and having some assistance in interpreting some of the panel and review comments along the way. So we're almost done here, but just a quick rundown of the process of submitting to the NEH itself. Applications must be submitted for a single grant program. You cannot apply for the same project, for the same activities to two different programs, excuse me. You can't double or triple your chances here. So you have to pick a program or pick a level and stick with it. And once you submit, we sort the applications by subject and sometimes media type, and reviewers are recruited to evaluate them based on the review criteria I mentioned earlier. So oftentimes when we have the numbers to do so, we will create separate review panels for podcast projects, for example, or for short documentaries, and separate those from the longer form subjects or takes that we might have in additional proposals in a grant line. Usually in our panels, we aim to have a mix of scholars and practitioners. That's usually 3 scholars with subject expertise when possible, and 2 practitioners who have a background in the types of media under consideration. From there, division staff makes recommendations, which are then passed up to our National Council on the Humanities, a body of 26 private citizens with expertise in the humanities, appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate, who offer us advice on our applications and programs. We meet with this National Council 3 times annually, and then they make their recommendations to the chair, who by law has the final say in all of the final funding decisions. So to recap, because it's a long process, for each proposal, 5 panelists, 26 council members, and several staff members from the agency all have a role in the recommendations of what to fund. Key point here, though, is that we are all using the review criteria I showed you before to guide us. Everyone to a person asks these same questions about each project that makes its way up the ladder. And then again, the chair makes her decisions based on the advice from throughout this process. Couple quick things about applying. In order to apply, you'll need to partner with an eligible 501c3 organization. This organization will administer the grant, but they also need to provide substantial contributions to the project itself. Rather than getting into that, I do recommend that you see the NOFO for more information on what this means, and we're here to help you untangle any of the questions that you have about eligibility on this side. Just reach out to us, and we'll do what we can there. Applications are accepted for the Media Projects grant line twice a year. The next one is coming up rather quickly on August 10th, and the following application period is January 11th, 2023. For applications that were received in August, you would receive notification after our next National Council meeting in March of 23. Applications received in January of 23 would receive notification after our July 2023 National Council meeting. If you're considering coming in August, get in touch immediately. It's a long road ahead, but many of you may have already taken a few steps down that pathway. All right, I'll stop there to make sure we have time for our sessions. Far more interesting participants, but again, please reach out to us with any questions you have about your project or proposal, and I will throw it back to you from here, Will, and look forward to taking some of your questions in the Q&A portion.
Thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate that. And you're welcome to stop sharing your screen whenever you want to reclaim your desktop. In the meantime, we're going to turn to Arwen Curry, who will discuss her role as an NEH panelist. Arwen's Hugo-nominated documentary Worlds of Ursula K. Le Guin was awarded development and production funding from the NEH and aired on PBS American Masters in 2019. Arwen served as an NEH American Media Makers panelist in 2012 and an NEH short documentary funding panelist in 2021. She was an AP or archival producer for EAMES, American Jerusalem, Jews and the Making of San Francisco, regarding Susan Sontag and KQED's Quest, and she regularly advises filmmakers on preparing NEH proposals. Arwen is a Bay Area native and a UC Berkeley J School graduate. Thanks for joining, Arwen.
Hi, thank you, Will, and thank you, Mark, also for that very helpful review and background of the process. Mark, you went through so many of the logistical steps of being on a panel that I may focus more on what the experience is like. But overall, I want to try to get to some of the questions that my fellows might have about the NEH application process. As Will mentioned, I'm recipient of NEH funding, and I also had the opportunity to be on 2 panels. One was in person back in the day when such things happened, and one was on Zoom just earlier this year. And that process, as Mark discussed, involves five panelists who come from a mixture of documentary filmmaking backgrounds and scholarship that is germane to the subjects that of the applications. And the panelists are given some time to digest the number of applications. I think for the short film panel, I had about 13. I had fewer than that for the longer feature films for the first panel that I participated in. And we gave then a preliminary grade and had a meeting that's about 3 hours long, very intensive meeting where we really got down to why we had given the grades for each of the criteria that Mark mentioned. And basically give each other a chance to present ideas, present our feedback about why we may have differing opinions. It's an open discussion that calls on all of our backgrounds and experience as filmmakers and in the topics that we're covering. And there's an opportunity to kind of change each other's minds, to focus on what's most important, to pull out things that might be red flags and so on. Or, perhaps a project is a wonderful project, but not ready and not able to kind of realistically present a production plan. So these things would be discussed, and then we have a chance to change our initial grades for each of those criteria. And then it continues on to the Humanities Council and finally to the chair for those final decisions. I want to just quickly bring up a couple of things that I remember from being on the panels that stick out to me as particularly that brought a project up to the top of the pile or that maybe caused a concern. I would say that the projects that were rated across the board as being excellent had an intersection of story and context that was really rich. So not only was the production plan realistic, the budget realistic, the team experienced, but there was a kind of depth to the story and character and a sense of the resonance of that story within the humanities and within our society. Certainly, as Mark mentioned, the humanities are part of they are kind of the essential mandate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and therefore they're of top concern. But it's not a stodgy group of scholars with bow ties smoking pipes either. The groups that I have been part of have been very thoughtful, very thorough, looking at all angles of an issue and sometimes, feeling a great affinity for a project, but having to recognize it's not ready, or, in the other direction saying this might not be my favorite, but I can see that these filmmakers, this team is ready to make something really of value. The criteria I won't go over because they're there on the web resources for you to find. But we are looking at, are the humanities central to this, and how, and have the scholars been integrated into the storytelling, and are the themes rich and resonant, and is this a realistic project? Is it something that we believe they can make and get out into the world for a general audience, and many other questions besides. I want to spend a moment just talking about the experience of applying for the NEH, because I know that as well as being a past recipient, I'm also a fellow from the ITVS Humanities Documentary Development Fund, and very grateful for the opportunity to be one. And I want to, share with my fellow fellows and the Sundance and Firelight fellows who may not have put the NEH at the top of their list because it maybe seems, again, like a closed system or difficult to penetrate, that those resources really are there for you. And I would take seriously what Mark is saying about accessing the program officers. This is kind of an essential part of it, I think, is getting that feedback early on. And that means reaching out early in the process to give them enough time to review the materials you have. The very first question would be, is this project a good fit for the NEH? Sometimes they're not. I think with most of us, they will be to some degree, since this is an NEH fellowship. But it is a question about which is the right level to come in at, what is the right grant, is it the right time for my grant, and those program officers will help you, and their feedback is really invaluable. So I definitely think that that's something to pursue. If you are not the person to, sometimes the process of writing an NEH grant can feel almost like a college dissertation. It can be quite extensive. So you need to give yourself some time to do that. And I know that Hazel will be coming on to tell you more about, her process with application. So I won't go too much into it, but I do want to say that if it seems incredibly daunting, even if the grant is not awarded or not awarded the first time, and neither of my grants were awarded the first time, and they often are not, both the feedback from the panelists, which we try to make as useful as possible, and the process itself of having to look deeply into those themes and having to think about what your project is truly about and how it will reach audiences and how it will change or deflect our society and the humanities fields that you're covering. This process is very valuable to your project, and it can't help but move you along, even if the grant is unsuccessful that first time, or even if it's never successful. I have never seen someone go through the process and not feel that they've come to kind of a new understanding of their project. So I want to make sure there's plenty of time for Hazel and for questions at the end. So I'll sign off there, but I'm very happy to answer any questions either in this panel or afterward directly.
Thank you so much, Arwen. I really appreciate that. And of course, all of you are already using the chat feed. Thank you. You're a great audience. Keep using it. Now we're going to hear from Hazel Gerlin-Pooler, an independent producer and director who has successfully applied for NEH support. Born in Colombia, Hazel is an NYC-based filmmaker who uplifts the stories of women from underrepresented communities combating intersectional injustice. She has collaborated with the acclaimed directors Stanley Nelson, Michelle Stevenson, and Henry Louis Gates Jr., whom she directed in 10 episodes of PBS's celebrity genealogy series, Finding Your Roots. Hazel has also co-produced the 6-hour PBS series, The African Americans, Many Rivers to Cross, which was honored with an Emmy, Peabody, DuPont Columbia, and NAACP Image Awards. Whew. She holds an MS from Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism and a BA from Bard College. And she received an NEH grant for her feature-length documentary Storming Caesar's Palace in spring 2021 and served on an NEH panel in fall of 2021. Welcome, Hazel.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here, for having me be here, I guess I should say. Thank you to the NEH, to ITBS, Firelight Media. I would not be here today as a successful grantee without everyone's enduring support for my project, Storming Caesar's Palace. So yeah, I just want to give a brief description of my project and then just dive right into how I worked on making this proposal. So Storming Caesar's Palace is a feature-length documentary about Las Vegas activist Ruby Duncan, who ignited mother power and mobilized a local welfare rights chapter to fight for justice, dignity, democratic participation, and an adequate income. And this is back in the 60s and 70s. And so when thousands of Las Vegas families were slashed from the welfare rolls, Ruby called in the National Welfare Rights Organization, which she was a member of, and launched Operation Nevada, And they led an army, including Ralph Abernathy and Jane Fonda, down the strip into Caesar's Palace and shut it down. From protesters to lobbyists for food stamps and guaranteed income to founders of an anti-poverty center in her community, Ruby really proves her mantra that we can do it and do it better. And the film features a lot of lost archival footage and a cast who played pivotal roles in the events. And the film really reveals that one of the most extraordinary yet forgotten feminist anti-poverty movements in the United States really can be a blueprint for today for an equitable future. So you can tell from this, from my kind of overview, that the film is an historical documentary, which I think is part of what made it so perfect for the NEH. So I decided to apply initially because I've been working on this film for like 15 years. I should just say that right away. This is like a labor of love project. And so I had started out fundraising when I was an associate producer and then a co-producer and then a producer at different production companies. And I would hear people whispering there, like, oh, they're working on their big grant proposals to the NEH. And I figured, well, why can't I do that for my project? So I decided to do it. And I had been writing applications and proposals for funding from other sources for years, right? Again, 15 years. So I'd had experience sort of, but also experience getting rejected. So learning what was working, what wasn't working from feedback over the years was also really helpful. And oftentimes I felt like I was, writing these applications, trying to get, say, $15,000 or something like that, which of course is amazing. But when I realized that at the NEH, you could get a would take care of my entire budget gap and allow me to really dream big. Like in an ideal world, what did I want from my film? Beyond just finishing it, but it was things like, what would my educational and impact and audience engagement campaigns really look like? So I just set to dreaming and wrote it all down and put it all into my application. So if you haven't gone to the website already at NEH, when you do, you will see how huge this application is. And it's a little daunting, but you can totally do it. So have faith, you got this. And you should really look, as Arwen suggested, at some of the earlier examples of grants that they have, because they're a gold mine. You can really see laid out pretty much, what was successful, like what they want to see. And it helps you think, oh, my project does this, my film does that, this is how I should talk about it. So really important to look at. And just, again, because it's a humanities project, you have to think about it from that perspective. So it is sort of like writing a college term paper or dissertation, which when I wrote this, I hadn't done in like 20 years. So that was kind of horrifying. But you'll need to be in touch with scholars. You will need footnotes and a bibliography, and really be able to express how you're thinking about the issues in your film. And it's funny because in a lot of applications when you're applying, they don't want it to sound like an issue film or like, what is the subject of the film? It's very character driven. For this application, it's almost the opposite. They want to know that you have done your homework and that you are basically ready to do a dissertation on your project and the folks that are in it. So I was at basically an assembly of the film when I applied, just to give you a sense of sort of what stage I was at. Majority of my filming, I knew I had key interviews that I still needed to do, that I was really saving, that would fill in holes, but a lot of it really was done, which was lucky because that was the summer of COVID, when filming and everything seemed horrifying. So I was lucky that I was in that position when I was applying. And as I said, I had already done a lot of writing for various grants like Firelight Media's Doc Lab and ITVS's Diversity Development Fund and Open Call, which I had applied for like 10 times, seriously, and had finally just gotten it. So I think this is an important thing. I mean, it was obviously blessed and really, really lucky. But I think being able to say that I had Open Call and ITBS in my corner, as well as, of course, Firelight, it enabled NEH to know that I was going to have a PBS broadcast. So I think that, just really strengthened the application. And PBS for me was perfect because it is maybe not as sexy sounding as Netflix or some other streamer, but it's far more democratic, which is precisely what my project is about. And so really we can reach as many people as possible, and it can be seen by students and, folks in prison and just really everybody. So being able to express all of that in my application, I think was really important. What else? I will say that I had to seek some help, right? Like, you can't do this by yourself. It takes a village. So I have, supporters who were able to help me. And I did seek out someone who had done a successful NEH grant before. Again, I had so much of the written materials sort of there, but they needed to be kind of folded into the ways that the NEH application required. And so she was really helpful in that way. And I figured, I hired her for a few weeks, and it was the smartest thing I ever did, because definitely recommend that if you can. And I also had to work with a fiscal sponsor. I reached out to Women Make Movies. They weren't my sponsor before, but when I said I was applying, they came on board, and it was great. They're really helpful. I recommend them as well. They help with some of the budget stuff that has to get uploaded to the NEH portal, which is kind of tricky to navigate. So it was great to have their help and their support. And they're now my educational, festival, and impact campaign distributors of the film. So it's not like they just kind of helped for this part. Like, they really became an integral part of my project. I think, I don't want to take up too much time because I know folks want to ask questions and get their questions answered. But I think, from really figuring out how to define humanities content in these applications is a really important part. And it really was just thinking, like, if I was writing a paper about this, what would I be saying? And for this, for my project, there were certain aspects like the Great Migration and escaping the Jim Crow South. These were like historical moments and important histories that helped to make this a humanity. Shares that history in a very personal way, but for this to be able to explain why that was important, what she found when she arrived in Nevada was also important, and putting her struggle kind of in an intersectional BIPOC kind of framework when we look at civil rights movement was also really important. So there were just very specific ways that I was able to kind of say, what are the, historical kind of nuggets that I need to be able to explain clearly. And I had been working with historians and scholars throughout the process because I'd been reading their books, and it was easy for me to reach out to them. And they, had promised that they would participate by looking at rough cuts and giving feedback and making sure everything was accurate. So really for this, it was just reaching out again and being like, hey, I'm applying for this. Will you write me a letter of support, and just giving them enough time to be able to do that without being like, I need it next Wednesday, which is something I tend to do. But I didn't for this. I was good because you really do need the time. I think the one I just want to say really quickly, this grant really was incredible because it changed my project in that I was no longer like desperately looking for funding all the time, which meant I could really put my energy into making the film itself. I really can't thank them enough for that because it was able, just to make me be able to really look at the archival footage, and instead of just saying, yeah, I'll take that, I was able to go back and be like, no, there should be more. Look for this, or here's like footage, but can we have it retransferred so that it looks beautiful? Things that would be really expensive to do. But for this, it didn't end up being prohibitive because I had this funding. And same with having a composer and having great graphics and things. I really wanted this film to stand out, and I think that it does. So I would just go for it. I think you can all do it. You've got it in you, and I'm sure you have support system through ITVS and Firelight and many of the other funders out there, Sundance, that will help you. So I will stop talking so that I can answer questions. And yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Hazel.
Sure.
That was really helpful. I'm going to invite everybody who is a panelist, so also Arwen and Mark, to hop back on with their video so we can engage some questions here as a group. I'm going to try to cluster a few questions that I saw coming up. They were particularly raised by Raul and Juanita about the humanities scholars, and I think there's probably some shared interest in that. Really, can a scholar be a producer? What is the average number of scholars associated with these kinds of projects? What kind of honorarium should folks be thinking about with regards to compensating the labor of those scholars? And, do those scholars need to appear on screen? So feel free as a group to take whatever part of that you find you can, address.
Why don't I jump in first and then defer to our two esteemed panelists for some specifics on how they went through it. First thing to mention is NEH does not dictate honoraria fees or anything of that sort. We make it very, very intentional choice to not do so, given that these negotiations really should be taking place between the project team and the scholars themselves, because what you want are firm commitments. And I will say that if there are absences of honoraria in a project that are accounted for by letters of interest or commitment, that might be okay. But we want these folks to be involved. The humanities isn't some gratis system. It's not something we do out of the goodness of our heart. We want the field to be sustainable. We want the folks working in it to be able to carve out a living for themselves. And we want those commitments to be as rock solid as possible. Compensation works on that side too. The question about a producer acting in that regard, sure, that's happened before. We've done that kind of work. But again, thinking of it singularly as a scholar is the wrong way to go about this, because a scholar team or a humanities team is really the way to be considering this. That doesn't always have to be those folks in the quote unquote ivory towers, but it can be expertise that you may find at an archival institution, a historic site, spaces like that too. We want that expertise in the room, but there's no set numbers as to how many folks you should have on your project. Again, the way to look at this is about the context that your project is situated within, the frames and the boundaries that you hope this expertise can provide, and the ability to tell a full story, even if it's one that does have, at certain points, contradictory impulses that can be accommodated nonetheless by your scholar team. And no, you don't need to have them appear on screen. The talking head model of documentaries is thankfully, or maybe not so thankfully, something that the NEH has moved past. We do fund both types of filmmaking, verite and the more traditional documentary work, and we've funded some recently that are quite successful. There's obviously a trick in how the script shifts when you're talking about those folks that you can't quote directly. So again, another plug. Reach out to us. We've had some experience with helping these sorts of projects through, and I'd love to hear from you. Over to you two.
So I think that for my film, I had about 7 advisors. And one thing that wasn't mentioned, but I think is important, is that some of them will sort of rise to be really close to the project, and you'll be communicating with them frequently. Others, maybe not so much. I think everyone that I had was reviewing at least one script and a rough cut, but some of them are going to be much more than that. But in addition to the individual relationships with the scholars, there's also the kind of the hive mind of the scholars. And so if it is possible to assemble them, either virtually or in person, that can happen in the development phase or even in the production phase, where they get together and actually argue about your topic. And particularly if you are in a world that you're not, native to and you're not part of, and you are bringing in, whether they're formal or informal scholars, they can call you on some things that you really need to know. So I think, and that can kind of accelerate exponentially when they're in the room together. So I really recommend that. And as for honoraria, I think something between 500 and 1,200 may be appropriate, but it depends on how many you have and your relationship and maybe their degree of participation.
I don't really have that much to add to that, except, I do have my scholars. Some of them are in my film as my talking heads, and they're great. I mean, obviously some scholars are very, armchairy, but others are like vibrant and, use them as you will. But there's definitely no requirement to use them, and you don't have to not use them. I think do what is best for your film, like what serves your projects. And I definitely second the idea of talking to folks who can make sure that you are, telling the story properly. For me, the most important thing was that Ruby and her family and the community, like, basically were okay with it. They were my number one audience, and ultimately they were thrilled with the way that it turned out, which was a huge relief. And so it's great. And I just really, would second, third, and fourth that.
That's great. So we have a question that I think all of you can share insights on from different angles. Marlene asks, what are you looking for in a work sample?
All right, I'll jump this out. From the bureaucratic side, as it says in the NOFO, we're looking for a work sample that's representative of the type of filmmaking you're proposing here. That means if you're working with something that requires reenactments, for example, we'd love to see that you have some experience in that space. I will toss it to both of you, though, because as you know, the devil really is in the details of this one. So anything you can offer from personal experience, I think would be welcome.
I mean, I think I sent in my entire assembly. So it was like an hour and a half that they had to plow through. I don't know how much of it they actually watched, but I think it was representative of what the film was, at least at the time, what I thought the film was going to look like. So it would have shown how the scholars would have, been kind of interwoven with Ruby and archival footage and verite scenes that I was filming too. So I think, if you're writing that that's what this is, they want to be able to see that you can pull it off. So I think just show them what you can. Yeah.
No, Hazel, thank you. I just want to add, though, that it is not a requirement that you send something in from the project being proposed. It's a completed work that had taken place prior to that point. Just to be clear, because not everyone's at that point, but yeah, of course, it's useful. And all our reviewers watch everything. I mean, if this is why we pay them such a. This is why we pay them. I won't talk about the amount.
Yes, it's enough to go out to dinner on. So that's no, just kidding. As from the point of view of the panel, of a panelist, I would just say that you want to, you want to show something that demonstrates a high production value, the highest production value that you can manage. And as Mark said, if you're doing something stylistic that you're, making an argument for in your proposal, that you try to represent that as well.
Great. I'm hopeful.
Can I just add,
please.
really, really quickly, that I don't want to mislead people by saying like send in an assembly that is like a complete disaster. Like that would not help you at all. So don't do that. Like if it's something that's short that you feel like will represent it well, that is a better thing to do. I think I just was at a moment where I was feeling like I'm ready to go. So that's why I did that. But just to be clear, because that could backfire.
Yeah, and that's why we changed the requirement a few years back, because forcing folks into that position was just not fair to any of the projects or the filmmakers.
So we have a bunch more questions. I'm hoping we can stretch just a few minutes past the time we had initially anticipated. We have a couple of more specific questions from Ash and Marlo. One is about what does a granting contract look like with the NEH? And does the NEH have any specific guidelines for how funds should or should not be spent? I'm assuming that's Mark to take the lead on this one.
Yeah, I'm the resident bureaucrat. So your contract will reflect what you proposed in both the budget and the work plan. Those are, quote unquote, binding documents at that stage, although there is a negotiation point if you receive the award to adjust somewhat as needed. But really, those are, what you put in the proposal there is really what we're more or less going to hold you to. And the period of performance varies from funding level to funding level. So for development, it's anywhere from 6 to 12 months. For production, it's up to 3 years. And there was another question on there about how that impacts distribution in the end. And, I'll just say this, that while most projects tend to be able to pull this stuff off, raising additional funding, finding a distributor, finding a home, doing the circuits in festivals and things like that sometimes take longer than anticipated. And given the way COVID has interrupted an awful lot of productions right now, I can say that, you should just talk to us. If you receive that award, you find that this time frame needs to be adjusted, there are ways to do that. But from the outset, put in what you optimistically think is the time that you need. And again, production, it can be up to 3 years on that side.
And Mark, there are examples of this on the website, correct?
There are. Yep.
Excellent.
I just wanted to mention also that, and correct me if I'm wrong about anything or out of date, Mark, but the NEH requires you to have your entire production budget in place before they release funding to you. So if you have an $800,000 budget and you get an award of $400,000, you would need to raise that amount before they'll release the funding. So you would want to be thinking about it in terms of your overall funding strategy.
Yeah, that's correct. And that's why development, again, for a lot of newer projects does make sense, because oftentimes that project budget is exactly as is outlined by the grant ceiling.
Yeah, I would just add that it's great when NEH comes in as your last funding, because then you can just hit the ground running with everything that you've got, which is what I did. So I was lucky that way. But I think it's really good to just know when it's your time to apply for this. Like if you have all your ducks in a row and all you need is the money to just finish. And I don't mean just the finishing part, but if you've already got everything planned out, you really have a realistic, production schedule, post-production schedule, you can do this, then I feel like you should totally go for it. But it takes a lot of energy to do this application. So I would just try to do it when you feel like you're really ready, and don't try to do it too early, because it may not work out. But you do get good responses, and then you can always reapply. I'm a big reapplier for things.
We have a couple of other quick budgetary questions here. Let's see. First from Juanita, is there a matching fund requirement? And then from Ruben, R&D funding won't be dispersed until other funding has been secured for the entirety of the budget? That's a question.
There is no match required. No. We do not require that in public programs. You can, of course, request that funding. Oftentimes it's a key part of the fundraising, but we do not require that for our projects here. And the question about R&D funding, if we're talking about at the development level, then there is nothing that needs to be raised at that stage if that covers fully the budget that you're proposing on that end. For production, things do get trickier there, though, and that full budget, as they note, does need to be in place on that side. But given the requirements that are really involved with production, a lot of that research really should be in place anyways in order to be successful. You're going to have to demonstrate that. So coming into us without that in place at a production level where the full budget needs to be raised is never a great strategy anyways.
And Kelly asks, is a fiscal sponsor needed for awards from the NEH?
Not unless you're working with, you do not have access to a 501c3 organization. That you have to apply as one of those documented and ready to go in grants.gov. If you are a 501c3 organization or you run a production house that does have that wing, then yes, you can apply without fiscal sponsorship on that side. If you do not have that, you have to partner with an organization who does.
Excellent. Well, we are about 7 minutes over time, and I want to be respectful of not only our panelists' time, but also all of you that have tuned in. With that said, I'm going to drop a link to email addresses for myself, Mark, and public programs in chat. Please set that aside. I will probably be less useful when it comes to public programs, but I can answer any questions about the ARPG programs. And Mark and public programs can help you as you think about not just your documentary films, but I know some of you were also interested in other types of public-facing work, whether it's podcasts or digital humanities work. And I know that there's a lot of support out there. So again, our hope is that this is the beginning of an ongoing conversation, and that now that you have some faces to place with the process, it's a little less intimidating than it might otherwise be. So thank you, Mark, Arwen, Hazel, and of course Jess and Zach for making this possible, and for all of you for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone. Again, yeah, thanks for all your work. Thanks for all you do. Thank you, Arwen, Hazel, Will, and please just reach out. We're here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.